Whether you're at the lease or the range, you need a case. We picked up this rifle case pattern pack at our local Tandy store. We also picked up this craft aid and a side of leather. We've lined this case with bark tan shearling. It's chrome free so it won't tarnish the metal and it will protect your equipment. Patterns can be extremely confusing, so I've highlighted all the parts that I'm going to cut out. The plan here is to cut out the pattern, tape it to this larger sheet of paper so that I have one solid piece to transfer onto the leather instead of trying to use a couple of pieces. I'm also going to cut out the instructions and keep those. I want to keep the original pattern too, even though it's cut up, because there's some more information on that pattern that I'm going to need. I've got this pattern traced out on the bigger piece of paper. When I go to cut this out, instead of cutting all the way around it, fold it in half and just cut one side so that it's symmetrical. An important part to note is after this is on the leather and you've cut it out, fold the leather in half and make sure that it's completely even. We're humans, there's always room for error, and we're not going to cut everything perfectly. You can do the same with the pattern as well. I was asked to use the deer craft aid, and I really like that because it has all the tools that I need to use. It tells me exactly what I need to do to carve it, bevel it, and also how to stain it and paint it. But I thought it was kind of boring and outdated, so I wanted to make this deer fancy and fresh. I added some geometric shapes, some flowers, some leaves, some pretty little jewels, a moon, and it took it from a pattern that we've seen a million times to something completely different, and I absolutely love how it turned out. You can do this to any craft aid that we have and make it completely your own, turn something that is kind of boring into something new and fresh. We've all seen tooling videos 1,000 times, so I don't really want to bore y'all with all the information about that. I am doing my stylus as I'm tooling. The reason I'm doing that is I'm kind of rounding off the edges, smoothing stuff down. There's places where when I transferred my pattern, it got off a little bit, so there's little lines. Using the stylus, you can kind of smooth that out and almost erase it. You will be able to see it if you're not going to stain it, but if you do, it goes away. It also smooths out your beveling a little bit if you've got some strike marks. It's a trick to really help just clean stuff up. These peonies were a challenge for me to tool. I've never done a peony before, and so I just thought I'd just jump right into it. I definitely suggest anything new that you want to try, get a scrap piece of leather, do a small section of it on the scrap piece of leather, and make sure you're doing it right. I just want to watch the world burn, so I don't do that, but that's definitely a pro tip that you should follow, as should I. I also made the deer's horns bigger because this is Texas and everything has to be bigger. Again, I'm using the stylus to create some definition in the horns. When I do this small triangle, I go in and I bevel around it. I don't like how it turned out in the end results, So I would suggest using a larger cedar to make the circles larger. I think that would look better if you're gonna do the same design. That goes back to trying things out on practice pieces before you just put them onto your leather, because once it's there, it's there. And here I'm just kind of blending it out so there's some texture all the way around it. If you've never figure carved, I highly suggest trying it because it is a lot of fun. As I was tooling this deer, I made sure to reference the craft aid to not only make sure I was using the tools that it suggested, but to make sure I was getting all the detail and definition that the original craft aid had us in it. I'm finishing it off with a hair blade tool. It's kind of hard to see on the video, but if you look at it in person, then after I paint it, you can see all the little tiny lines that it makes, and it looks like hair. I did short strokes, heavy in some areas and lighter in other areas, so that you could really tell that it is hair on this deer. I'm using a combination of our Cova Color acrylic paint and our water stain. I love the water stains because they're not too heavy. You can build on them. You can add water to them and make them lighter. They really work like watercolor, and they're so much fun to use. Here I'm using the Cova Color green. I've mixed it with a little bit of the brown water stain to make it a little bit more dull and dark. I love the white Cova Color too. You can also add a little bit of the pearl water stain with it to kind of thin it out and give it a really nice effect. So I'm painting all the flowers with white. I'm completely doing them white, and then I'll go back in with a blue water stain and blend it out, and then again with some blue Cova Color to really fade it. Y'all have seen some of my other videos. I love to fade the paint and the stains. Give it a nice ombre effect. I'm doing the same here. I started with some watercolor in a medium shade, and then I went darker at the corners into white. Oh, look at his little eye. I'm gluing down the zipper. I've already glued the handles in place. I did not follow the instructions. I should have sewed the handles on first and then done the zipper. So I would do that because it'll make your life a lot easier. I definitely caused myself some unnecessary pain and suffering. We're gonna glue the shearling to the rough side of the leather. It's gonna add padding and protection. So when I folded this, it was way too thick and it wasn't gonna close properly. I'm a hairstylist by trade. I always have clippers in my car, so I just ran out there, grabbed my clippers, and shaved it down. I don't know if this is a thing, but it worked magically, and it gave me the perfect amount of thickness that I needed. Here is our finished, what is it called, a gun scabbard?
It is a rifle scabbard.
Here's our finished scabbard. You can either hand sew this or use a machine. Our Tippmann Boss is really great for this type of project that's a bit more heavy. I used a machine here and I hand sewed the handles on. Either way is great. It depends on how much time you want to invest in it and how comfortable you are using a machine. This project was challenging, but it was still fun. Definitely follow the instructions on the patterns and do the steps that they tell you to do. I learned the hard way with the handles. I didn't sew those on first, and it was a pain in my